A priority pitch request hits my inbox at 11:48 at night from a dying company across the country. My hand freezes over the mouse because I know that signature. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. The father who told me I had absolutely no talent will walk into my building to beg for a partnership. He does not know I am the one holding the power. I have one night to decide whether to let him drown or make him finally look. My name is Brooklyn Moore. I am 34 years old, and from the corner office of the 32nd floor of the Tide Glass Technologies headquarters in Seattle. The city lights look less like a landscape and more like a vast, breathing motherboard I have finally learned to rewire. The rain against the floor-to-ceiling glass is a constant. Rhythmic drumming that usually calms me. But tonight the silence inside the room feels pressurized. It is nearly midnight. Most of the city is sleeping, but the glowing monitors in front of me are very much awake, displaying a queue of partnership proposals that would make most tech founders salivate. My chief operating officer, Lena Carver, walked in a moment ago without knocking. She is the only person in this building who knows that I do not require pageantry. She placed a tablet on my desk, her face lit by the blue hue of the screen. "There is a straggler," she said, her voice low and efficient. "It came in 2 minutes ago and marked priority urgently. It is a struggling firm out of Raleigh asking for an in-person pitch within 24 hours. I rubbed my temples, fighting the exhaustion that always creeps in around hour 16 of the workday. Raleigh. The geography pricked my skin like a needle. I reached for the mouse, my movements automatic, until I saw the sender field. Darren Caldwell, CEO, Caldwell Signal Works. The world stopped spinning for a second. The air conditioning hummed, the rain tapped against the glass, but I was suddenly somewhere else entirely. I was 16 years old in a kitchen that smelled of lemon polish and disappointment. I was standing in a driveway watching a sedan pull away without me. I forced my hand to stay steady as I clicked the file open. The proposal was desperate. There is no other word for it. In the business world, you learn to smell the copper tang of blood in the water, and Caldwell Signal Works was bleeding out. I scanned the financials, and the numbers were brutal. Revenue had contracted by 40% over the last 3 quarters. Client churn was up to 18% month over month. Their flagship platform, a legacy system that was once the industry standard, had not seen a significant architecture update in 5 years. They were drowning, and they had no idea they were swimming toward the shark they had created. I scrolled down to the attached leadership bios. There he was. Darren Caldwell. His hair was whiter than I remembered, his jawline a little softer, but the eyes were the same, steel gray, unimpressed, looking at a point just over the viewer's shoulder, and right below him was the reason my stomach tightened into a knot of cold iron. Vanessa Caldwell, Vice President of Operations. My sister, the golden child, the one who had the instincts, the one who was the future. Her biography was a masterclass in corporate fluff. It credited her for strategic initiatives that, according to the graphs I had just read, were responsible for driving the company into the ground. She looked perfect in her headshot. Of course, polished, professional, vacant. Lena was watching me closely. She knows my history in broad strokes. Poverty, estrangement, the clawing fight from the bottom. But she does not know the names. She does not know that the man asking for a lifeline is the same man who told me I was not built for pressure. "Tell them no," Lena said, reaching for the tablet. "Their burn rate is too high, and their tech stack is a dinosaur. It is a waste of your time." "Brooklyn, leave it," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and sharp. Lena paused, her hand hovering over the device. "You want to take it?" I looked at the calendar on my second monitor. I had a board review at 4 in the afternoon and a product sync at 10 in the morning. I had a window at 2. "Bring them in," I said. "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Here, in this conference room." Lena frowned, her professional mask slipping just a fraction. "Brooklyn, they are in North Carolina. That is a cross-country flight on less than a day of notice. If they are this cash poor, that is a massive ask. They will come." I said, I know they will come because they have nowhere else to go. I turned my chair toward the window, looking out at the Space Needle piercing the fog. I needed to control the variables. If Darren saw the name Moore attached to the CEO title, he might pause. He might remember the girl who changed her name the day she left the house with a single suitcase. Or maybe he wouldn't. Maybe I was so insignificant to his narrative that the name Brooklyn Moore meant absolutely nothing to him. That thought hurt more than the anger. "Lena," I said, keeping my back to her. "When you reply, use my first name only. Just Brooklyn. CEO, no last name, no headshot in the calendar invite. Tell them our security protocol requires blind intake for high-level IP meetings. That is not our protocol." Lena noted. "It is for tomorrow." I replied. Lena did not push. She is too smart for that. She tapped out the confirmation on her phone, the soft clicks sounding like gunshots in the quiet office. "Done," she said. "They just opened the receipt. They are booking the flight." When the door clicked shut behind her, the silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I stood up and walked to the glass. My reflection ghosted over the city lights. A woman in a tailored silk blazer, sharp lines, expensive haircut. A woman who commanded a valuation of $3 billion. I pressed my hand against the cold window. The old reflex surged up from my chest, hot and suffocating. It was the desperate, pathetic need to be seen, to force him to look at me. Not the daughter he ignored, not the teenager he dismissed, but this, the titan I had built from the scrap metal of his rejection. He had trained himself not to see me. He had practiced it every day of my childhood, looking right through me to focus on Vanessa, on his legacy, on his own reflection. Tomorrow, he will not have that luxury. I turned back to my desk and hit the intercom button. "Get the diligence team online." I ordered, "I know it is midnight. Wake them up. I want a full forensic audit of Caldwell Signal Works by 8 tomorrow morning. I want to know why they are losing clients. I want a breakdown of their product architecture. I want to know every liability, every lawsuit, every debt, and every bad decision. I want to know exactly how deep the rot goes." I sat down and watched the cursor blink on the screen. It was a countdown. In 14 hours. My father would walk through those double glass doors. He would try to sell me a survival plan for the company he loved more than he ever loved me. "Fine," I whispered to the empty room. "Pitch it to me. The rain in Seattle is cold, but the memory that pulls me under is stiflingly hot. It is the heat of a North Carolina summer, the kind that sticks your shirt to your back and makes the air shimmer off the asphalt. I am 16 years old again, sitting at a mahogany dining table that costs more than most people's cars, waiting for a pause in the conversation so I can present the only thing I have ever truly loved. I had spent the entire summer indoors, while Vanessa was out at the country club pool building her social capital. I had been in my bedroom, huddled over a bulky, second-hand laptop I had bought from a neighbor for $50 of babysitting money. It was a brick of a machine, slow and loud, but to me, it was a portal. I had taught myself to code in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn. I had built a predictive inventory system for our household pantry, a simple program, clumsy by my current standards, but it worked. It tracked consumption rates, predicted shortages, and automated shopping lists based on budget constraints. It was logical. It was ordered. It was proof that I was not just the quiet shadow in the hallway. At dinner, the air was thick with the smell of roast beef and Darren's monologue about quarterly projections. He dominated the space, as he always did, his voice a baritone weapon that left no room for interruption. Vanessa sat to his right, nodding at the perfect intervals, practicing the executive presence he was already grooming in her, when he finally paused to take a drink of wine. I pushed my laptop onto the table. The screen glowed blue against the dark wood. I made something. I said, my voice was small, cracking slightly. I wrote a program. It optimizes the household budget. Darren stopped chewing. He looked at the laptop, then at me, with an expression of mild amusement, as if a dog had just tried to walk on its hind legs. He did not ask how I did it. He did not ask to see the code. He just chuckled. a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the table. "Tech is not your lane, Brooklyn," he said. "Spearing a potato. You do not have the mind for the grind of it. It requires a certain hardness you just do not possess." He turned to Vanessa, his face lighting up with genuine pride. "Now, your sister. She has the instincts. Did you hear how she handled that scheduling conflict with the tennis team? That is leadership. That is the future of this family." I looked at Vanessa. I wanted her to defend me. I wanted her to look at the screen and see the hundreds of lines of logic I had woven together from nothing. Instead, she took a sip of her water, glanced at my screen, and shrugged. "It is a cute hobby," she said. She did not say it with malice. That would have been easier to hate. She said it with an effortless dismissal, as if my months of sleepless nights were equivalent to making a friendship bracelet or painting by numbers. It was a casual cruelty that cut deeper than any insult, because it confirmed my place in the hierarchy. I was a hobbyist. She was the heir. That dynamic became the architecture of my adolescence. At school, I began to win. I won the state mathematics competition. I placed first in a regional coding hackathon where I was the only girl on the winning team. I brought the trophies home and placed them on the kitchen counter, desperate for them to be noticed. Darren would walk past them, glance down, and say, "That is nice. Brooklyn, nice." The word was a pat on the head. It was a participation ribbon. 2 weeks later, Vanessa organized a charity bake sale that raised $200. Darren cleared his schedule. We went out to a steakhouse to celebrate. He toasted to her initiative, to her ability to mobilize people, to her natural fit for the boardroom. I sat at the end of the table, dissecting the fibers of my napkin, realizing that my achievements were invisible because they did not fit the story he had written for me. In his mind, I was soft. I was the artist, the dreamer, the one who needed protection, not power. The silence became my shield. When the acceptance letter came from a top-tier computer science program in California, a program with an acceptance rate of under 5%, I did not tape it to the refrigerator. I did not run screaming through the hallways. I folded it and hid it under my mattress. I hid it because a week prior, at a neighborhood barbecue, I had heard Darren talking to a business rival. "Brooklyn is a sweet girl," he had said, holding a beer, "but she is not built for pressure. She would crack in a week in our industry. We are looking at liberal arts for her. Something safe." Elaine, my mother, was the variable I could never solve. In the privacy of the laundry room or the quiet of the car, she would squeeze my hand. She would whisper that I was brilliant, that she saw how hard I worked. But the moment Darren walked into the room, she evaporated. She became a ghost in her own house, nodding along with his edicts, smoothing over the rough edges of his neglect. I learned to resent her silence almost as much as his dismissal. Survival in the Caldwell house meant letting Darren control the reality, and she was a survivor. I learned the lesson that would eventually shape my entire management philosophy. The loudest cruelty is not when someone yells at you, it is when they turn away. It is the absolute refusal to witness your worth. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday in May, graduation day. I was the valedictorian of my class, a fact I had mentioned 3 times at dinner, only to be met with vague nods. I stood on the podium in my gown, the stadium lights blindingly bright, looking out at the sea of parents. I had rehearsed my speech for weeks, but I was not thinking about the words. I was scanning the VIP section where the families sat. I saw Elaine. She was wearing a blue dress, twisting a tissue in her hands, looking anxious. Next to her was an empty seat. I delivered my speech to that empty folding chair. I spoke about the future, about technology, about the courage to build new things, and every word felt like I was screaming into a void. I accepted my diploma, shook the principal's hand, and walked off the stage with a smile plastered on my face that felt like it was made of glass. That night, my phone rang in the hallway of our silent house. It was Darren. "Good job today." "Kiddo," he said. The background noise sounded like a hotel bar. Clinking glasses, laughter. "I'm sorry I missed it. Something came up with the merger. You understand. Business." I held the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. I understand, I said. Listen, he continued, his voice shifting into that benevolent, problem-solving tone I hated. I made some calls. I know you are worried about what comes next. My friend Bob has a logistics firm in town. He needs someone at the front desk, maybe some data entry. It is low stress. Good hours. Safe. It would be a good fit for you. Safe. He was offering me a cage. He was offering me a life of filing papers and answering phones because he genuinely believed that was the ceiling of my capability. He did not see the valedictorian. He did not see the coder. He saw a fragile little thing that needed to be parked somewhere harmless so the real players could work. I looked at the staircase where my suitcase was already packed, hidden in the back of my closet. Thanks, Dad, I said, my voice steady for the first time in years. I will think about it. I hung up the phone. I did not cry. I think I had run out of tears years ago. Instead, I felt a cold clarity settle over me, hard and permanent. He would never see me, not if I won a Nobel Prize, not if I invented the next internet, not if I screamed in his face. To him, I was fixed. I was finished. I walked into my room and pulled the acceptance letter from under the mattress. I looked at the scholarship amount, enough to cover tuition, but not enough for housing or food. I had $300 in cash and a bus ticket I had bought 2 days ago. I zipped the suitcase. I did not write a note. A note would imply that there was still a conversation to be had, and the conversation was over. The original wound wasn't that he didn't love me, it was that he didn't respect me, and I decided, standing in the dark of the room where I had taught myself to code, that I would never again ask for approval from a man who was determined to be blind. I walked out the back door, leaving the keys on the kitchen counter, and I did not look back. I stepped off the bus in Seattle into a gray drizzle that felt like a baptism. The air smelled of salt water and diesel, a sharp contrast to the humid pine of North Carolina. I had traveled nearly 3,000 miles to get as far away from the word nice as possible. I found a studio apartment in the International District that was smaller than the walk-in closet in my father's master bedroom. It had a single window that looked out onto a brick wall, and the radiator hissed like an angry cat, but it was mine. I bought a mattress from a thrift store and dragged it up 3 flights of stairs by myself, sweating and cursing, refusing to ask for help. For the first 6 months, I existed in a state of controlled exhaustion. I took contract work fixing server racks for small businesses and debugging terrible websites for local dentists. It was grunt work, unglamorous and underpaid, but it kept the lights on. By day, I was the invisible IT girl, crawling under desks to plug in Ethernet cables. By night, I was the architect of my own kingdom. I sat on that mattress with my laptop, coding until my eyes burned, building the framework for what would become Tide Glass. It was during one of those late nights, while digging through my suitcase for a clean pair of socks, that I found the envelope. It was tucked inside the lining of my winter coat, a place I never checked. My mother must have slipped it in while I was at school, days before I left. Inside was a stack of bills totaling $800 and a small white business card. There was no note, just the money and the card. The name on the card read, Marjorie Quinn, Angel Investor, with a San Francisco number. I remembered the name vaguely. She was an old college friend of my mother, a woman who had visited once when I was 7 and had made Darren uncomfortable because she asked too many direct questions. I put the card on the windowsill and did not touch it for weeks. I wanted to do this alone. I wanted to prove that I did not need a safety net. But the tech world in the early days was a fortress, and I was trying to break in with a plastic spoon. I spent months cold-calling venture capital firms and dragging myself to networking events where men in Patagonia vests looked right through me. I was too young. I was a woman. I was a nobody with no Stanford degree and no family connections to vouch for me. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in November. I had just walked out of my 9th pitch meeting with a boutique firm in Bellevue. The junior partner had spent 20 minutes checking his watch, and then told me my revenue projections were cute. He actually used that word, cute. I walked to the parking garage, sat in my rusted sedan, and screamed. I screamed until my throat felt raw. I looked at my bank account balance on my phone. I had $42 left. Rent was due in 3 days. I was going to fail. I was going to have to go home and answer the phone at my father's friend's logistics company. I wiped my face with my sleeve, pulled the crumpled business card out of my wallet, and dialed the number. Marjorie Quinn agreed to meet me the next morning at a coffee shop near the waterfront. She was older than I remembered, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that assessed me like I was a distressed asset. She did not order coffee. She sat down, folded her hands, and told me I had 10 minutes. I pitched her with a ferocity born of pure desperation. I did not use buzzwords. I did not talk about synergy. I walked her through the architecture of the data integration platform I was building. I showed her how it could bridge the gap between legacy systems and modern cloud infrastructure, a problem that was costing enterprise companies billions of dollars a year. When I finished, she stared at me for a long silence. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a checkbook. "I will give you $50,000 for 5%, she said. I nearly fell off my chair. "But," she added, raising a finger, "I have one condition, a personal one." I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I know who your father is," Marjorie said. "I know Darren. I know how he operates. If he finds out you are building this, he will find a way to take credit for it. Or he will find a way to crush it because he cannot control it. So, if I back you, the name Caldwell dies today. You are not his daughter in this boardroom. You are a ghost." I looked at the check. It was freedom. It was a weapon. "My middle name is Brooklyn." I said, "My mother's maiden name is Moore." Marjorie signed the check and slid it across the table. "Pleasure doing business with you. Ms. Moore." Tideglass Technologies started in a rented room above a bakery in Pioneer Square. It smelled constantly of yeast and burnt sugar. I hired 2 people, a back-end engineer who had been fired from Microsoft for insubordination and a UX designer who lived in a van. We were a team of misfits, and we worked with a chip on our shoulder the size of the Space Needle. We did not sleep. We iterated. We broke things and fixed them before sunrise. The product was not pretty, but it was bulletproof. Our breakthrough happened 8 months later. A massive shipping conglomerate was trying to merge with a digital retail giant, and their systems were speaking 2 different languages. The integration was a nightmare. 3 major consulting firms had tried to fix it and failed, costing the client millions in delays. I got a meeting with their CTO because he was desperate enough to talk to anyone. I walked in, plugged my laptop into their server, and ran a demo script I had written the night before. It pinged their database, translated the protocol, and returned a clean data set in 4 seconds. The room went silent. The CTO looked at me, then at the screen, then back at me. "Who are you again?" he asked. "I am the one who just saved your merger." I said, "That contract changed everything." We moved out of the room above the bakery. We hired 10 people, then 50, then 200. We scaled faster than I could buy furniture. I stopped fixing printers and started destroying competitors. I learned to wear the silence I'd grown up with like armor. In negotiations, I was impenetrable. I let other people talk themselves into corners. And then I took the room. Years compressed into a blur of quarterly reports and product launches. Tideglass became the industry standard for enterprise integration. We hit a valuation of $1 billion, then 2, then 3. I was on the cover of magazines, but always with my face partially in shadow. Always with the narrative I controlled. I was Brooklyn Moore, the self-made phantom. I scrubbed my history with the precision of a crime scene cleaner. I paid reputation management firms to bury any link to North Carolina. I had no past before Seattle. I had no family. I was a digital entity that had sprung fully formed from the rain. And it worked. It worked so well that a desperate CEO in Raleigh could look at a list of potential partners, see the name Tideglass, and see only a lifeline. He could look at the name Brooklyn Moore and see a stranger. I stood in my high-rise office, looking at the city I had conquered. My father was flying across the country right now, sitting in first class, drinking scotch, preparing to charm a woman he thinks he has never met. He believes he is coming to negotiate a deal. He has no idea he is flying straight into the consequences of his own blindness. The conference room on the 32nd floor is designed to intimidate. It is all glass and steel, suspended over the city like a floating verdict. I sat at the head of the long table, my back to the view, watching the door as Lena ushered them in. Darren Caldwell entered first. He walked with the same confident stride I remembered, leading with his chest, his smile fixed in place like a shield, but up close, the cracks were visible. There were deep lines etched around his mouth, and his suit, while expensive, hung slightly loose on his frame, as if he had lost weight from stress he refused to acknowledge. Vanessa followed him. She looked immaculate in a cream-colored dress that likely cost more than my first car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, glossy bun, and she carried a leather portfolio like a prop. She scanned the room, her eyes sliding over me without a flicker of recognition. To her, I was just another checkbook, another obstacle to charm. Trailing them was a man I did not know, but I recognized his type instantly. The dossier identified him as Gavin Holt, a board member brought in 6 months ago to stop the bleeding. He was slick, wearing a suit that was too tight and a watch that was too big. He looked around the room, not with respect, but with appraisal, as if he were calculating the resale value of the chairs. "Please, sit," I said. My voice was low, modulated to reveal nothing. Darren took the seat directly opposite me. Vanessa took his right flank, Gavin his left. They were a phalanx of the old world, arranging themselves against the new. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice," Darren began. His voice was that familiar baritone, rich and reassuring. It was the voice that had sold millions of dollars of hardware in the 90s. "We have heard incredible things about Tide Glass. We believe there is a unique opportunity for strategic alignment between our firms." I did not smile. I did not nod. I just watched him. "Walk me through the proposal," I said. Darren launched into the pitch. It was a masterclass in corporate theater. He used words like synergies, market transition, and legacy leverage. He spoke about Caldwell Signal Works as if it were a sleeping giant waiting to be woken up, rather than a terminally ill patient on life support. But I heard the fear vibrating underneath the buzzwords. I heard the tremor in his hands when he turned the pages of his deck. He was not pitching for growth. He was begging for oxygen. He handed the floor to Vanessa to cover operations. She stood up, smoothing her dress, and began to speak. "Our operational efficiency is at an all-time high," she said, pointing to a graph that was clearly manipulated to show a flat line instead of a decline. "We have streamlined our client acquisition funnel and optimized our retention protocols. We are positioned for a vertical leap." It was a performance. I recognized the cadence. It was the same tone she used to use at dinner parties when guests asked about her grades. It was confident, polished, and completely empty. She was dodging specifics with the skill of a politician. I let her finish. I let the silence hang in the room for a full 10 seconds after she stopped speaking. The air conditioning hummed. Gavin shifted in his seat. Vanessa's smile began to tremble at the edges. I looked down at the tablet in front of me. "You mentioned retention," I said, not looking up. "My due diligence shows your client churn is at 18% month over month. You have lost 3 of your top 5 enterprise accounts in the last quarter. That does not look like optimization to me. It looks like a mass exodus." Vanessa blinked. She looked at Darren, then back at me. There was a micro-reaction, a tiny narrowing of her eyes. She tilted her head slightly, studying my face. For a second, just a second, I saw her brain try to make a connection. She knew the intensity. She knew the way I held my pen. But she had spent 20 years erasing me from her memory, and she could not retrieve the file. "That data is historic," Gavin cut in, leaning forward. He had a smile that did not reach his eyes. "We are looking at the big picture here. The market is volatile. Those clients left because of budget cuts, not product failure. We are talking about a partnership that looks forward, not backward. You need to understand the legacy value of the Caldwell brand." He was trying to dominate the room. He was trying to big league me. I turned my gaze to him. Mr. Holt, I said, I understand the value of the brand. I also understand that your flagship platform, PulseStack, runs on a codebase that has not been refactored in 5 years. I understand that you have a debt maturity of $12 million coming due in 90 days. And I understand that you are currently burning cash at a rate that gives you exactly 6 weeks of runway before you miss payroll. The room went dead silent. Gavin's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I had just stripped him naked in front of his CEO. I did not get that from a report. I lied smoothly. I got that from math. Darren looked at Gavin, his face hardening. He realized at that moment that his hired gun was empty. He turned back to me, and the sales mask was gone. He looked old. He looked tired. Look, he said, his voice dropping an octave. We are in a transition. That is true. But the foundation is solid. We built this company from nothing. We have relationships. We just need a technology partner to bring us into the modern era. We need what you have. He paused, leaning over the table, his eyes searching mine for some sign of empathy. What is it going to take? He asked. What does Tideglass want in return for a lifeline? This was the moment. The elevator clock in my head struck 0. I stood up. I buttoned my blazer slowly. I walked over to the window and looked out at the gray sky, letting them stare at my back. I do not want your stock, I said to the glass, and I do not want your board seats. I turned around to face them. I rested my hands on the back of my chair. I want to tell you a story, I said. Darren frowned, confused by the shift in tone. It is a story about a potential investment. I continued. There was a house in Raleigh, a big house, and inside that house, there was a girl with a second-hand laptop she bought with money she earned babysitting neighbors' kids. Vanessa went still. Her hand went to her throat. She sat at a dinner table one night, I said, locking eyes with Darren, and she showed her father a system she had built. It was a predictive algorithm for household inventory. It was clumsy, but it was brilliant. And her father looked at it for 4 seconds. Darren's face went slack. The color drained out of his skin so fast, it looked like a physical blow. He looked at it. I said, my voice steady and cold, and he laughed. He told her she had no talent. He told her that technology was not her lane. He pointed to her sister and called her the future. Gavin looked between us, sensing the sudden, violent shift in the room's gravity, but not understanding the source. That girl left home with 1 suitcase, I said. She changed her name so she would never have to trade on a legacy that did not want her. She built a $3 billion company from a rented room above a bakery because she had to prove that she existed. Darren stood up. His legs were shaking. He gripped the edge of the table. Brooklyn? He whispered. It came out as a question, a prayer, and a curse all at once. I walked around the table until I was standing right in front of him. I was close enough to see the broken capillaries in his eyes. I was close enough to smell his cologne, the same scent that had lingered in the hallway on the night he missed my graduation. My name is Brooklyn Moore, I said, and you are here asking for a partnership from the daughter you told had no tech talent. The silence that followed was not the silence of negotiation. It was the silence of a bomb that had just detonated, and we were all waiting for the shockwave to hit. The door clicked shut behind the last of the lawyers, leaving the conference room in a heavy, pressurized silence. My hand was still resting on the mahogany table, vibrating slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash of a confrontation 3 decades in the making. But as the sun began to dip lower over the Seattle skyline, turning the rain-slicked glass into a mirror, the emotional vindication began to curdle into something colder. A suspicion started to itch at the back of my neck. Darren had been too desperate, his pitch had been too hollow, and PulseStack, the platform they were so terrified of losing, had remained stagnant for 5 years. In the technology sector, 5 years is a geological epoch. If they had a team of engineers, why hadn't they evolved it? I picked up the internal phone and dialed Lena. I need a level 4 technical audit of the PulseStack source code. I said, my voice flat. Not just the API documentation. I need to see the repository. I need to see the architecture diagrams, the commit history, and the library dependencies. Get it tonight. Lena did not ask why. She just said, consider it done. 2 hours later, I was back in my private office with 3 monitors glowing in the dark. The file transfer from Caldwell Signal Works had arrived under strict legal guardrails, watermarked and encrypted. But code is code. It speaks a language that cannot lie. I opened the primary architecture diagram first. It was a sprawling map of data nodes and logic gates, representing the brain of their flagship product. I zoomed in on the central processing engine, the part of the software that decided how to weigh and prioritize data packets. The moment the image resolved, a wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of my desk. I knew this pattern. I did not just know it. I felt it in my fingertips. The branching logic was not standard industry practice. It was idiosyncratic. It used a specific, inefficient looping structure that I had favored when I was 19 years old because I thought it looked elegant. The weighting system used a prime number sequence to assign value, a quirk I had developed during the summer before I was supposed to leave for college. The summer I spent alone in my room building what I intended to be my future university capstone project. It was my mind on the screen. I typed a command into the terminal, my fingers flying. I needed to see the raw code. Lena's team had stripped the compiled binaries, giving me access to the text files that built the machine. I ran a metadata scan, searching for file origination dates and author tags. The results scrolled down the screen in green text. Most of the files had been scrubbed and updated with corporate headers from Caldwell Signal Works. But data forensics is like archaeology. There is always a layer deeper than the dirt. I found a source folder buried deep in the legacy libraries, a folder that had been imported into their environment 7 years ago. The folder name was distinct: Project Ether. My breath caught in my throat. Project Ether was the name I had given my private workspace on the family's shared home server, the server I had built and maintained because Darren couldn't figure out how to network the printers. I had left that server behind when I walked out with my suitcase. I had assumed they would wipe it. I pulled up the code from the folder and opened it side by side with the current PulseStack engine. It was a massacre. The innovation that Darren had bragged about in trade magazines, the proprietary technology that had launched their company into the stratosphere during my early 20s, was not theirs. It was mine. They had taken my foundation, the code I had poured my soul into while they laughed at me downstairs, and they had simply built a new interface on top of it. I scrolled line by line. I found variable names I had created based on characters from books I read as a teenager. I found a comment block on line 412 that said simply, "Check logic here. It feels heavy." They had not even bothered to delete my notes. They just compiled it, packaged it, and sold it. Then came the final blow. I opened the legal discovery folder, the one containing their intellectual property filings. I sorted by date and found a provisional patent draft from 6 years ago. It was for a predictive data weighting algorithm. I opened the PDF. My eyes scanned past the abstract, past the legal jargon, down to the bottom of the first page. Inventor, Vanessa Caldwell. I stared at the name until the letters blurred. Vanessa, the sister who had called my coding a cute hobby, the sister who had looked at my screen with bored indifference. She was listed as the inventor of the logic that I had birthed in the dark. The realization reorganized my entire history. This was not just a story about a father who neglected his daughter. This was a story about a heist. They did not just doubt my talent. They had recognized it, stolen it, and then gaslit me into believing I was worthless, so I would not come back to claim it. They had cannibalized my future to feed their ego. I stood up and paced the length of my office. The rage that filled me was not hot. It was absolute zero. I wanted to burn them. I had the evidence on my screen to destroy Caldwell Signal Works by morning. I could leak the code comparison to the press. I could file an injunction that would freeze their assets and strip them of their intellectual property. I could watch Darren and Vanessa be paraded out of their building by federal marshals for fraud. But then I thought about the due diligence report Lena had sent earlier. I thought about the 250 employees working in the Raleigh office, engineers, sales reps, receptionists, people with mortgages and children and lives that had nothing to do with this family feud. If I destroyed the company to get my revenge, they would be the collateral damage. They would lose everything because my father was a thief and my sister was a liar. I walked back to the window. The city below was asleep, indifferent to the moral calculus playing out in the sky. I held the power of a god in my hands, but using it felt like a trap. If I burned them down, I became exactly what Darren said I was: destructive, emotional, unable to handle the pressure. But I could not let them walk away. I could not let them keep the credit for the mind they had tried to erase. I looked at the reflection of the woman in the glass. I was not the girl who ran away anymore. I was the CEO who made hard choices. Fine, I whispered to the rain. We do not burn the building. We evict the landlords. The next morning, the war was not being fought on the battlefield of code, but in the sterile, soundproofed air of my own boardroom. The Tide Glass Board of Directors had convened an emergency session, and the atmosphere was less like a strategy meeting and more like an inquisition. Marcus Thorne, our lead independent director, threw the due diligence file onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap that echoed in the silence. This makes absolutely no sense. Brooklyn, he said, his voice tight with frustration. You are proposing we acquire a company that is hemorrhaging cash, losing market share, and running on legacy architecture. Their balance sheet is a disaster. You are usually the most ruthless operator in this city. Why are you burning resources on a corpse? I sat at the head of the table, keeping my face perfectly still. Under the table, my hands were clenched so tight my nails were digging into my palms. This was the trap I had built for myself. I could not tell them the truth. If I told them that Caldwell Signal Works possessed stolen intellectual property that belonged to me, the company's value would drop to zero instantly, and I would be forced to recuse myself for a conflict of interest. I would lose control of the narrative, and Darren and Vanessa would be destroyed by lawyers before I could extract the justice I needed. I had to lie. Or rather, I had to tell a version of the truth that omitted the heart of the matter. I am not buying their balance sheet. Marcus, I said, keeping my voice steady, I am buying their data density. PulseStack has 15 years of historical enterprise logic embedded in its core. That is training data for our next generation of predictive models. If we build it ourselves, it takes 3 years. If we buy them, we have it in 3 months. It is an acqui-hire of data, not a merger of equals. Marcus narrowed his eyes. He did not look convinced, but he did not have the technical depth to argue the specifics of data training models with me. It is a high-risk play, he muttered. If this goes sideways, if there are skeletons in that closet you haven't found, it is your head on the block. Brooklyn. I nodded. I accept that risk. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I was carrying a lead vest. I was deceiving my own board to protect a family that had done nothing but betray me. The irony was bitter enough to taste. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I did not have saved, but the area code was Raleigh. Can we have dinner? Just us, as sisters, please. V. I stared at the screen. Vanessa had not asked to have dinner with me in 17 years. The last time we ate together, she was telling me my coding was a cute hobby. Now, with her company's neck in the guillotine, she wanted sisterhood. I met her at a quiet bistro in Belltown, away from the prying eyes of the tech district. She was waiting for me at a corner table, wearing a softer dress than the armor she had worn in the boardroom. When she saw me, she stood up and offered a smile that looked almost genuine. Brooklyn, she said, reaching out as if to hug me, then stopping when she saw my body language. You look incredible. Seattle suits you. Sit down. Vanessa, I said, taking my seat. The dinner was a surreal piece of theater. Vanessa ordered a bottle of expensive wine and chattered about the rain, the seafood, the skyline, everything except the deal. She asked about my apartment. She asked if I was seeing anyone. She was projecting a warmth I had never received from her. Not once, in our entire childhood, It was disorienting, like watching a snake try to purr. I watched her closely, every few minutes. Her hand would drift below the table. Her eyes would lose focus for a fraction of a second, shifting downward, before snapping back to my face with renewed brightness. So, Dad is really thinking about retirement after this, she said, swirling her wine. He talks about it all the time. He just wants to know the company is in safe hands. He is so proud of you. You know, he really is. I didn't flinch. He has a funny way of showing it. Vanessa sighed. A dramatic, practiced sound. He is from a different generation. Brooke, he didn't know how to handle a girl like you, but he means well. While she spoke, her shoulders dipped slightly. She was typing. I knew the angle of the elbow. I knew the rhythm. She was sending messages under the table while telling me how much our father loved me. I decided to test the water. The valuation is tricky. Vanessa, I said, dropping my voice. The board is pushing back. I might have to lower the offer price by 10% to get it approved tomorrow. Her eyes snapped to mine. There was a flash of panic, sharp and immediate, before she smoothed it over. Oh, she said. Well, I am sure you will do your best. We trust you. Her hand went back under the table. She typed furiously for 3 seconds, then took a sip of wine. I finished the dinner with a knot in my stomach. When I walked out into the cool night air, I didn't feel like a sister. I felt like a mark. I drove straight back to the office. It was nearly 10 at night, but the lights were on in the operations center. Lena was waiting for me, her face illuminated by a wall of monitors. She looked grim. We have a problem, she said, not bothering with a greeting. Show me, I said. Lena pulled up a network visualization graph. It showed traffic spikes, jagged red lines cutting across the screen. I put a competitive monitoring trace on the Caldwell team's devices as part of the standard diligence package. Lena explained. I just flagged a series of encrypted bursts originating from a device registered to Vanessa Caldwell. I leaned in. Who is she talking to? Lena hit a key. The lines connected to a server node in San Jose. Blackpine Systems, Lena said. The air left the room. Blackpine Systems was our biggest rival. They were the only other company with the capital to absorb a firm like Caldwell. And they were ruthless. They had been trying to undercut Tide Glass for years. She is leaking the deal, I whispered. Lena nodded. It looks like it. The timestamps of the messages align perfectly with your dinner. Did you tell her anything specific? I told her I might have to drop the offer price. I said, my voice cold. Lena pointed to the screen. Look at this. 2 minutes after you likely said that, Blackpine's deal team logged into their secure data room. She is feeding them our posture. She is telling them we are wobbling so they can come in with a counteroffer. She is trying to start a bidding war. I stared at the red lines. It was so brazen. Vanessa sat across from me, playing the role of the reconciling sister, drinking my wine, invoking our father's love, all while typing out my secrets to my enemies under the table. She wasn't just protecting her company. She was actively betting against me. She was using my proximity to slit my throat. They are not just desperate, Lena said, crossing her arms. They are dangerous. If Blackpine gets Pulse Stack, and they find that stolen code, they will weaponize it against us. They will sue us for infringement on the very tech you built. I felt a cold clarity settle over me, the sentimentality of the dinner, the hope that maybe, just maybe, my family wanted to make peace. It all evaporated. There was no family here. There were only combatants. Can we decrypt the messages? I asked. Not yet, Lena said. They are using an ephemeral messaging app, but the metadata is damning. The pattern is undeniable. I turned away from the screen and looked out at the city. I had hesitated to destroy them because I wanted to protect the innocent. But Vanessa had just proven that she had no such qualms. She was willing to blow up the entire deal, risk the jobs of her employees, and hand her father's company to a shark, just to avoid losing to me. I need absolute proof. I said, I know it is her. I know what she's doing. But if I accuse her without the smoking gun, she will deny it. Darren will back her. and the board will see it as me being emotional. I need to catch her hand in the jar. How? Lena asked. I turned back to her. We are going to give her exactly what she wants. I said, she wants to play the game? Fine. We are going to feed her a piece of information so toxic that when she passes it to Blackpine, it will set off every alarm bell in this building. We are not going to block the leak. Lena, we are going to flood it. The evidence arrived at 6 o'clock in the evening, not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a printer in the Security Operations Center. Lena stood over the machine, watching the pages slide out one by one. Her face illuminated by the rhythmic flash of the status light. She did not need to speak. The grim set of her jaw told me everything. I picked up the stack. It was a digital autopsy of betrayal. The leak had not just been a careless conversation or a stolen glance at a document. It was a structured data exfiltration. Lena's team had traced the packet headers from the encrypted messaging app directly to a specific device unique identifier, a company-issued tablet registered to Vanessa Caldwell. But the path the data took was the real knife in the back. The signal had been relayed through a residential IP address in Bellevue before hitting the Blackpine system servers. I know that address, Lena said, pointing to the line on the paper. That is Gavin Holt's home network. They were working together. My sister and the board member who had looked at me with such disdain were running a back channel to my biggest competitor. They were not just trying to get a better price. They were trying to orchestrate a hostile takeover that would cut Tideglass out completely, likely hoping Blackpine would keep them in charge after the acquisition. I felt a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. It was the taste of finality. Clear the floor. I told Lena, send the night staff home. I want the building empty in an hour. I pulled out my phone and typed a single message to Vanessa. I have the final term sheet. It is better than we discussed. Come to my office at 9. Come alone. We sign tonight. It was the bait she could not resist. The promise of victory. She arrived at 9 sharp. The office was dark, save for the ambient glow of the city lights filtering through the rain-streaked glass and the single lamp on my desk. Vanessa walked in, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floor like a metronome. She looked triumphant, clutching her purse, ready to claim the prize she believed she had maneuvered into existence. Hey, she said, her voice echoing in the empty space. It is spooky here. Where is everyone? Gone, I said, remaining seated. I wanted this to be just us. I motioned to the chair opposite me. She sat down, smoothing her skirt, her eyes darting to the folder on my desk. So, she said, leaning forward, the terms? You mentioned they were better. I did not answer. Instead, I opened the folder. I took out the first page, a log of the encrypted messages sent during our dinner. I slid it across the glass surface of the desk. I took out the second page, the tracer route showing the data moving from her tablet to Gavin's router. I slid that one over. I took out the third page, a transcript of the deal points Blackpine had received, identical to the ones I had fed her as a test. Vanessa looked at the papers. Her smile did not fade immediately. It froze, then slowly curdled into a look of confusion, and finally, sheer terror. She reached for the first page, her fingers trembling slightly. What is this? She asked, her voice tight. It is the map of how you tried to kill me. I said, my voice was not loud. I found that whispering was far more violent in a room this quiet. I know about Blackpine. I know about Gavin. I know you were negotiating a side deal while you were drinking my wine and telling me how much Dad loves me. Vanessa dropped the paper. Denial is the first reflex of the guilty, and she played it poorly. This is ridiculous, she scoffed, trying to regain her composure. You are paranoid. Brooklyn, you always have been. These are just glitches. I don't know what you think you are seeing, but... Stop. I cut in. The word cracked like a whip. Do not insult my intelligence. I built the systems that caught you. You are not debating a lawyer. Vanessa, you are arguing with a mathematician. The probability of this being a coincidence is 0. She stared at me, her chest heaving. The silence stretched between us, taut as a wire, until it finally snapped. The mask of the polished executive fell away, and beneath it, I saw something ugly and raw. "Fine," she spat. Her voice rose, shrill and jagged. "You want the truth?" "Yes, I did it. I called Blackpine." "Why?" I asked. "Why burn your own family?" "Because I am not going to let you be the savior," she screamed. Standing up, she slammed her hands onto the desk. "Do you have any idea what it is like? To watch you run away and become this legend? While I stayed in that house. Brooklyn. I stayed and managed his ego. I stayed and fixed his messes. I gave up my life to be the daughter he wanted." She was shaking now, tears of rage spilling over. "He talked about you," she said, her voice breaking, "for years. After you left, he would get drunk and stare at the wall and mutter about how you were ungrateful. But I knew he was terrified that he was wrong about you. And now you show up with your billions and your perfect suit, ready to bail us out? Ready to prove that you were the genius all along and I was just the placeholder?" I looked at her, stunned. I had always assumed she was the villain in our story. I had never considered that she was also a casualty. "I wasn't trying to destroy you," she sobbed, sinking back into the chair. "I was trying to stop you from winning. If Blackpine bought us, the company survives. But you don't get the glory. You don't get to walk in and pity us. You knew," I said softly. "It wasn't a question. Back then, when I showed you my code, you knew it was good." Vanessa wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. "Of course I knew," she whispered. "You think I'm stupid? I knew it was brilliant. That is why I had to dismiss it." She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. "Darren didn't just ignore you, Brooklyn. He pitted us against each other. If I praised you, he would punish me. He would freeze me out for days if I didn't echo his opinion. Survival in that house meant agreeing with him. I had to believe you were worthless. Because if you were the talented one, then what was I? I was just the pretty one, the obedient one, the one with no actual skill." The confession hung in the air. I looked at the woman across from me. My enemy, my sister. I saw the double truth of it. She had betrayed me. Yes, she had stolen my intellectual property and tried to sabotage my company. But she had also been shaped into a weapon by the same man who had discarded me. I had escaped to build myself. She had stayed and been hollowed out. She had used my code not because she was a thief at heart, but because she was desperate to produce the results Darren demanded. And she didn't have the ability to do it herself. She was a fraud created by a father who cared more about the appearance of success than the reality of it. Vanessa looked at the papers scattered on the desk. The evidence that could send her to prison for corporate espionage. She looked back at me, her defiance gone, replaced by a terrified exhaustion. "Are you going to ruin me?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. I looked at the rain hitting the window. I thought about the police. I thought about the press releases. I thought about the vindication of watching her life fall apart. It would be easy. It would be justified. But then I looked at her hands. They were shaking the same way my mother's hands used to shake when Darren raised his voice. I stood up and gathered the papers into a neat stack. I tapped them against the desk to align the edges. "I am not going to ruin you, Vanessa," I said, "but I'm not going to save you either." I placed the folder back in the drawer and locked it. "I am deciding what justice costs," I said, "and right now, the price is your absolute surrender." I arrived back at my penthouse a little after 2 in the morning. My body felt heavy, not with sleep, but with the dense, suffocating weight of the truth Vanessa had spilled in my office. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, looking out at the city that usually made me feel powerful. Tonight, it just felt cold. I had caught the thief, and the thief was my sister. I had won, but it felt like losing. Then came the knock. It was a tentative, rhythmic rapping on my front door. My stomach dropped. I lived in a secure building with a doorman and private elevator access. No one got to my floor unless I buzzed them up. I walked to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, and checked the camera feed. I froze, standing in the hallway, clutching a worn cardboard box against her chest like a shield. Was Elaine Moore my mother? I had not seen her face in 17 years, except in the background of press photos where she stood half hidden behind Darren's shoulder. She looked older. Her hair was gray, pulled back in a loose clip, and her coat was wet from the rain. But her eyes were the same, soft, anxious, and currently filled with a terrifying determination. I opened the door. "Mom?" I whispered. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like a language I had forgotten how to speak. "May I come in?" "Brooklyn?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but I could see the tremor in her hands. I stepped aside. She walked into the foyer, dripping water onto the marble floor. She didn't look at the art or the view. She walked straight to the kitchen island and set the box down. "How did you find me?" I asked, closing the door. "How did you get up here?" "I told the man downstairs I was your mother." She said simply, "He believed me. I suppose we still have the same eyes." She put her hand on the box. It was an old shoebox, taped at the corners. "You need to see this," she said, "before you sign anything tomorrow, before you decide what to do with your father." She opened the lid. Inside, there were stacks of envelopes bundled with rubber bands, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. I walked closer. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was hers. I picked up the top bundle. The envelopes were addressed to me, to my first apartment in the International District, to the P.O. box I had for Tide Glass in the early days, even to my current office. They were all opened, and they were all stamped with dates that spanned the last decade. "I wrote to you every week," Elaine said softly. "For the first 5 years. I wrote every single Sunday. I sent birthday cards. I sent Christmas cards. I sent letters just asking if you were eating enough." I looked up at her, my vision blurring. "I never got these." "I know," she said. "Darren intercepted them. He routed the mail. He told the staff to bring anything with your name on it directly to his study. He told me they came back returned to sender. He told me you had moved and left no forwarding address. He told me, I tried to find her, Elaine, but she does not want to be found." She reached into the box and pulled out a smaller stack. These were receipts, private investigator invoices. "I hired 3 different people to find you over the years," she said. "Darren fired them all. He threatened to sue them if they contacted me. He wanted you erased. Brooklyn. He wanted to punish me for missing you." A hot, jagged rage clawed at my throat. All those years I thought she had chosen his side. All those years I thought her silence was a rejection. It wasn't. It was a blockade. "But that is not why I'm here," she said. She reached to the bottom of the box and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. It was an old model, scratched and tarnished. She held it out to me. "I went into your room the night you left," she said. "I sat on your bed and I cried for hours. But then I saw your computer, the big gray one you bought. You had left it running. I took the drive." The metal was warm from her hand. "I didn't understand what was on it," she admitted. "I don't speak your language. Brooklyn, I see numbers and lines. But I knew you. I knew how many nights you stayed up. I knew that whatever was on that machine was the reason he was so threatened by you." She took a breath, steeling herself. "So I copied it. I dragged every file I could find onto this drive. I didn't know why. I just had a feeling, a mother's instinct, that someday he would try to take it from you, or lie about it." I plugged the drive into my laptop on the counter. A folder popped up, dated 17 years ago. I opened it. It was my capstone, the original source code for the predictive engine. But there was something else. Inside the folder was a scanned document, a printout of an email from Darren's work account, dated 3 months after I left. I opened the PDF. It was an email from Darren to his lead engineer at the time. The subject line was, "New architecture direction." The body of the email read, "Found this on the home server. Clean it up. Rename the variables. We are pivoting the flagship to this logic. Do not ask where it came from." I stared at the screen. This wasn't just theft. This was premeditated. documented evidence that he knew exactly what he was stealing. He hadn't just stumbled upon a good idea. He had raided his own daughter's ghost. He knew. I whispered. He knew the whole time. Elaine nodded. He knew. And he was terrified that you would realize he built his empire on the scraps you left behind. I looked at my mother. I saw the lines on her face, the gray in her hair, and I realized the immense, silent war she had been fighting inside that house. She hadn't just been a victim. She had been a sleeper agent. She had been collecting evidence for 17 years, waiting for the moment I would be strong enough to use it. "There is one more thing," she said. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a receipt. It was old, the ink fading. It was a bank transfer receipt. "Do you remember Marjorie Quinn?" she asked. The name hit me like a physical blow. Marjorie Quinn, the angel investor, the woman who had given me $50,000 in a coffee shop when I had $42 to my name, the woman who had saved my life. I stared at Elaine. "You told me you found her business card in your bag," I said slowly. Elaine smiled. A sad, weary smile. "Marjorie was my roommate in college. We were best friends before I met Darren. When you left, I called her. I sent her every dollar I had managed to stash away in a separate account over 20 years. It was $50,000. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I told her that if you ever called, if you ever reached out, she was to give you that money." Elaine said, "I told her to make up a story about why she couldn't use your name. I knew if you thought the money came from me, you wouldn't take it. You were too proud. You wanted to do it alone." Tears finally spilled over my cheeks. I had built my entire identity on the story that I was self-made. I had worn my isolation like a badge of honor. I thought I had defied the odds, that I had won because I was the only one who believed in me. But I was wrong. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone, every step of the way. My mother had been there. She had funded my seed round. She had preserved my intellectual property. She had tried to send me love letters through a blockade. I walked around the island and pulled her into my arms. She felt small, fragile, but when she hugged me back, her grip was iron. We stood there in the kitchen of my penthouse, sobbing into each other's coats. Two women who had survived the same man in different ways. "I thought you didn't care," I choked out. "I cared too much," she whispered into my hair. "That is why he had to separate us." We stood there for a long time, until the city lights began to fade into the gray of pre-dawn. The anger that had fueled me for decades, the cold, hard drive to prove him wrong, was gone. It had burned out, replaced by something far more dangerous: clarity. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the $50,000 my mother had saved, dollar by dollar. I was fighting for the letters that never arrived. I was fighting for the woman who had stayed in the belly of the beast to make sure I had a weapon when I finally came back. I pulled away and wiped my face. I looked at the drive, then at the box of letters. "You can't go back there, Mom," I said. "I know," she said. "I left my key on the table. I am done." I nodded. Good. I picked up my phone. The time was 4:45 in the morning. I dialed Lena. She answered on the first ring, her voice alert. "Report?" Lena said. I looked at my mother, who was watching me with pride. "Do not kill the deal," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. Lena paused. "Brooklyn, we have proof of espionage. We can bury them." "No," I said. "If we kill the deal, the company dissolves. The employees lose their jobs, and Darren gets to play the victim of a hostile market. That is too easy." I looked at the sunrise breaking over the Space Needle. "Rewrite it," I ordered. "I want a new term sheet. Total control. He keeps the title, but I want his voting rights. I want the board seats. I want the intellectual property signed over to Tide Glass. And I want a specific clause regarding the invention of Pulse Stack." "Brooklyn," Lena warned. "This is aggressive. I am done running." "Lena," I said, "draft it. I will see you in 3 hours." The sun was barely cresting over the Cascades when the legal team arrived, looking disheveled and caffeinated. I did not offer them coffee. I offered them a mandate. The document we were about to draft was not a standard merger agreement. It was a surgical instrument designed to excise a tumor without killing the patient. I sat at the head of the table with Lena to my right, and the silver USB drive my mother had given me resting on the glass surface like a grenade. I want the employment protection clause front and center. I told the lead counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah. Sarah looked at her notes. Usually, in a distressed asset acquisition, we cut headcount by 30 to 40% to stabilize cash flow. It is standard operating procedure. Not today. I said, I want a guaranteed no layoff provision for 18 months. I want full retention of the Raleigh support staff and engineering team. And I want their benefits package aligned with Tide Glass standards immediately. That means their healthcare premiums go down by half, and their equity vesting accelerates. Sarah paused, her pen hovering. Brooklyn. That will increase our burn rate by $3 million a quarter. The board will scream. Let them scream, I replied. I am paying for this company with my reputation, and I will not start my tenure by firing innocent people because previous leadership was incompetent. The employees in Raleigh are victims of a theft they did not know they were committing. We are going to protect them. I watched her write it down. That was the shield. Now came the sword. Let us talk about leadership. I said, my voice dropping. Darren Caldwell. Sarah nodded. We can offer him a transition package. 6 months as a consultant, then a clean break? No, I said. He stays. Lena turned to look at me, surprised. He stays as founder emeritus. I continued. It is a ceremonial title. He will have no operational authority, no signature power, no board seat, no vote. He will have an office in the building, but he will not be allowed to attend strategy meetings. He will be a figurehead, forced to watch from the sidelines as I fix everything he broke. It was a crueler punishment than firing him. Firing him would let him play the martyr. Keeping him as a powerless figurehead meant he had to witness his own obsolescence every single day. And Vanessa? Sarah asked. My chest tightened. I thought about the sister who had betrayed me, but also the sister who had been hollowed out by the same man who discarded me. She is out, as vice president of operations. I said, effective immediately. However, we will offer her a probationary advisory role. She will assist with the knowledge transfer and the clean room rebuild of the platform. If she cooperates fully, and I mean fully, we will discuss a path back to a leadership role in 2 years. If she hides one email, one file, or one conversation, she is terminated with cause and loses her equity. It was a leash, but it was also a lifeline. It was more than she deserved, and exactly what she needed. A chance to work without her father's shadow looming over her. Now, the intellectual property, I said, tapping the drive on the table. We are not going to sue them for the stolen code. That would tie us up in court for 5 years and destroy the asset value. Instead, we are going to structure this as a remediation. I dictated the terms. The Pulse Stack platform would be quarantined. Tide Glass engineers would rebuild the core architecture using cleanroom standards, meaning we would rewrite the code from scratch to replicate the functionality without using the stolen lines. It was a massive undertaking, but it was the only legal way to sanitize the product, to ensure compliance. I added a mechanism I called the Truth Clause. It stated that the acquisition price was contingent on full disclosure of all past misappropriations. If any further evidence of stolen IP or corporate espionage emerged after signing, the deal value would retroactively convert to a penalty, effectively bankrupting Darren and Vanessa personally while keeping the company assets under Tide Glass control. Draft it, I said. We sign at 4 o'clock. By noon, the document was ready, but there was one loose end I needed to tie up before the main event. I told Lena to summon Gavin Holt. I did not want him in the main conference room. I wanted him in the small, windowless breakout room we used for deposition prep. It was claustrophobic and cold. When Gavin walked in, he looked annoyed. He checked his oversized watch and didn't bother to sit down. I hope this is quick. Brooklyn, he said, I have a flight to catch, and frankly, this negotiation is dragging. If you are not careful, we are going to take the Black Pine offer. It is very competitive. I sat at the small table, a single folder in front of me. There is no Black Pine offer. Gavin, I said. He laughed. A sharp, dismissive bark. You are bluffing. I have been on the phone with their deal team all morning. I know. I said. I opened the folder. And I know you are routing those calls through your home network in Bellevue to avoid the corporate firewalls. Gavin stopped moving. The arrogance drained out of his face, replaced by a sudden, sharp vigilance. I pulled out the device fingerprinting logs Lena had compiled. This is a log of unauthorized data exfiltration from a Caldwell officer to a direct competitor, facilitated by a board member. I recited. Reading from the sheet. That is you, Gavin. In the state of Washington, that is corporate espionage. It is a felony. It carries a prison sentence of up to 10 years and fines that will turn your net worth into a rounding error. Gavin stared at the paper. He licked his lips. You obtained this illegally, he stammered. It is inadmissible. I am not a prosecutor. Gavin, I said, leaning back, I am a CEO, and I don't need a judge to destroy you. I just need to send this PDF to the ethics committee of every board you sit on. I need to send it to the SEC. I need to send it to the legal counsel of your own firm. I slid the paper across the table. Your career ends the moment I hit send. I said, you will never sit on a board again. You will never sign a deal again. You will be radioactive. He slumped into the chair, the fight leaving him instantly. He was a bully, and like all bullies, he crumbled when the power dynamic shifted. What do you want? He asked, his voice shaking. I want your resignation from the Caldwell board, effective immediately. I said, I want you to sign a statement confirming that you acted alone in the attempt to solicit a counteroffer, protecting the company from liability, and then I want you to get on that plane and never say my name again. He signed the resignation letter with a pen that shook in his hand. He didn't say a word. He just signed it, stood up, and walked out of the room like a dead man walking. I took a deep breath. The rats were gone. Now it was time for the Kings. I walked back to my office where Lena was waiting with the final contracts. They were thick, heavy documents bound in blue folders. Is it done? She asked. Gavin is gone. I confirmed. I looked at the clock. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. Set up the signing in the main boardroom. I said. Lena looked at me. The big one? It holds 50 people. It will be empty. No. I said, I want the entire due diligence team in there. I want the legal team. I want the department heads. Why? Lena asked. Because I want witnesses, I said, buttoning my blazer. Darren spent his whole life hiding what he did to me in the dark. He lied in private. He stole in secret. Today, he is going to sign his surrender in the brightest room in Seattle, with 20 people watching him do it. I picked up the USB drive and put it in my pocket. Let's go buy a company, I said. The main conference room at Tide Glass was not designed for comfort. It was designed for clarity. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, exposing us to the gray Seattle sky, and the table was a slab of white marble that looked like an altar. I stood at the head of it, watching the room fill up. I had summoned the entire due diligence team, the department heads, and the senior legal counsel. There were 20 people in the room, silent and waiting. When the doors opened and Lena ushered in Darren and Vanessa, the air in the room shifted. Darren walked in expecting a private signing, a quiet handshake to save his dignity. Instead, he walked into an audience. He paused at the threshold, his eyes scanning the faces of the strangers who were about to witness his capitulation. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, his suit hanging loosely on his frame. The confidence that had defined my childhood stripped away to reveal the fear underneath. Please, sit, I said. They took their seats at the far end of the table. I remained standing. I did not offer water. I did not offer small talk. I placed the final acquisition agreement in the center of the table. This is the offer, I announced, my voice carrying to the back of the room without effort. It is non-negotiable. The price is set. The terms are locked. Darren reached for the document, his hand trembling slightly. I will summarize it for you. I said, Tide Glass acquires 100% of Caldwell Signal Works, All 250 employees in the Raleigh office are retained with a guarantee of no layoffs for 18 months. Their benefits are upgraded effective immediately to match our internal standards. Darren looked up, confused. He had expected me to gut the company. However, I continued. The leadership structure is dissolved. Vanessa Caldwell is removed as Vice President of Operations. Darren Caldwell is removed as CEO. You will retain the title of Founder Emeritus. It comes with no salary, no voting rights, no board seat, and no authority. You will not step foot in the operational zones of the building. Darren's face flushed a deep, mottled red. You cannot do that, he sputtered. It is my company. I built it. No. I said, you didn't. I signaled to Lena. She slid a black folder across the marble table. It stopped directly in front of him. Open it, I commanded. Darren opened the folder. The first page was the code comparison. The side-by-side analysis of the pulse stack architecture and my university capstone project. The logic was identical. The variable structures were identical. It was undeniable proof of theft, but it was the second document that sucked the oxygen out of the room. It was the printout of the email Elaine had preserved for 17 years. The email where Darren explicitly instructed his engineers to clean up the code he found on the home server and not to ask questions. The room was so quiet, I could hear the rain hitting the glass. Darren stared at the paper. He did not deny it. He did not shout. He just slumped, the fight draining out of him like water from a cracked vessel. I knew, he whispered. He looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, he looked at me with total honesty. I knew it was yours. Brooklyn, I walked past your room one night when you were 16. I saw what you were building on that screen, and it terrified me. You were a child. You were a girl, and you were already better than I was. He let out a shaky breath. I couldn't let you have it, he said. If I acknowledged your talent, I would have to admit my own mediocrity. I chose to be the king of a stolen kingdom rather than the father of a genius. A ripple of shock went through the witnesses. My general counsel looked down at her notes, uncomfortable with the raw intimacy of the confession. I nodded slowly. I accepted the truth, not as an apology, but as a surrender. There is one more thing, I said. I turned to Vanessa. She was staring at the table, her face pale. The leak. I said, I presented the evidence of the communication with Black Pine Systems. The room murmured. Corporate espionage is the cardinal sin in our industry, and the department heads glared at her. Vanessa looked at the evidence, then at me. She saw the exit ramp I had built for her in the contract, the probationary role, the chance to earn her way back if she came clean. It wasn't just me, she said, her voice shaking. She grabbed a pen from the table and pulled a legal pad toward her. I am signing a sworn statement, she announced to the room. I facilitated the leak, but it was orchestrated by Gavin Holt. He wanted to force a bidding war to cash out his equity. He used me, she wrote furiously, signing her name at the bottom with a hard, tearing stroke. I did it to protect the company, she said, pushing the paper toward my lawyer, and I accept the consequences. Just don't punish the staff for my mistakes. I nodded to my security chief. He stepped forward and formally announced that Gavin Holt had been served with a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty and was currently being escorted by legal counsel to a deposition. Gavin was gone. His career vaporized, erased from the narrative as if he had never existed. That left only the signature. Darren looked at the contract. He looked at the black folder. He looked at the daughter he had dismissed, who was now standing at the head of the table, holding the pen that would end his reign. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so badly that the tip scratched against the paper. He signed his name. It was a messy, jagged scrawl, nothing like the arrogant signature that had frozen my hand over the mouse just 24 hours ago. It is done, I said. I closed the folder. The meeting was adjourned. The witnesses filed out, leaving the three of us alone in the vast, glass room. Darren stood up. He looked old. He looked like a stranger. I suppose you want me to apologize, he said. I buttoned my blazer and walked to the door. I stopped and looked back at him. I am not forgiving you today. Dad, I said, my voice was calm, but I am not letting your damage define my choices either. I saved your company not for you, but because I refuse to be the kind of person who burns things down just to feel warm. I walked out. The weeks that followed were a blur of integration and repair. We gutted the pulse stack code, rebuilding it from the ground up in a clean room, finally giving the platform the engine it deserved. The jobs in Raleigh were saved. The employees, terrified of the acquisition, were shocked to find their healthcare costs dropping and their jobs secure. Elaine left him a week after the signing. She didn't make a scene. She just packed a bag, took her share of the assets, and moved into a condo in Seattle, 3 blocks from my building. We have dinner every Sunday. We are learning to know each other without the silence. Vanessa took the demotion. She works in a small office on the 2nd floor of the Raleigh building. She reports to a manager 10 years younger than her, but last week, she sent me an email with a legitimate optimization idea for the new interface. It wasn't brilliant, but it was hers, and for the first time, she signed it Vanessa instead of VP of Operations. I stood on my balcony last night, looking out at the city. The rain had stopped. I thought about revenge. I thought about how I used to dream of destroying them. But standing there, with the company safe and my mother free, I realized that true power isn't about destruction. It isn't about making people pay. It is about having the power to destroy them and choosing to build something better instead. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It really means the world to me to share these journeys with you. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please comment below with your country or city so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe to the Lucy Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.